In this video, I'm going to continue talking about Barbara Ehrenreich's nickel and dime on not getting by in America. And in this video, we're going to talk about Barbara's experience in her third locality. She started out serving in Florida. She then went and she was a housekeeper, right, in Maine. She was scrubbing in Maine, is the way she entitles her chapter. And now in chapter 3, she is selling in Minnesota. And on page 121, we gain the understanding about why Barbara decides to move to Minnesota, to try to be a low-wage worker in Minnesota, right? The author, before she moved to Minnesota, Barbara, before she moved to Minnesota, she had heard that Minnesota was a kind place for those on welfare, right, to work. It was a welfare-friendly state. It was a state friendly to low-wage workers. On page 124, she notes, when presenting yourself to a potential employee, when you're presenting yourself as a potential employee, you can never be too much of a suck-up. And she talks about that, of course, when she's fudging her test scores, right, on her Walmart personality test. She talks about whether rules have to be followed to the letter at all times. I had agreed with this only strongly, rather than very strongly or totally, right? And so, again, rules are not absolute. Sometimes a rule may need to be broken, right? If we could live our society by rules, then we would not have Duckett's constitutional interpretation. There'd be no need for it. We have to interpret rules. We have to interpret laws. We have to interpret legal standings, because you cannot make laws that do not require discretion. And let me give an example of what Barbara meant when she only agreed strongly rather than very strongly. What she's saying is, for example, we might agree as people that we shouldn't steal from one another. But if our neighbor's home is on fire, one of our neighbor's homes on fire, would we not break into another neighbor's house and steal their hose if stealing their hose would allow us to put out the fire in the other neighbor's home? These are the kind of things we're talking about. You're technically stealing. But shouldn't your neighbor understand the fact that you broke into their home to steal their hose in order to save the home of another neighbor whose home was on fire? Right? Laws are in some ways very ambiguous. If you're a bus driver and you're driving down a highway and you lose your brakes and it's a downcline, right? What do? Do you let the bus continue down the mountain and roll over and probably have all the children in the bus killed because the company didn't take care of the bus's brakes correctly? Or do you run into the back of a tractor trailer where you're still going relatively slowly, even if a tractor trailer driver is bending over the back end of the tractor trailer? Do you commit murder? It's technically vehicular homicide to hit that tractor trailer driver. But you're doing it in order to save all the children on the bus. And you might reason to yourself that the tractor trailer driver should have known what he was doing when he was driving and not have been behind his trailer, looking at something like the tires or something, and not been paying attention to a bus driver who might be hitting the back of his trailer to try to stop her bus and save the children. Right? So, again, nothing is simple. If it was simple, we wouldn't need courses in philosophy, ethics, and so forth. So the fact that Barbara writes only agreed that, rules have to be followed to the letter at all times, she gave the right answer. Sometimes you have to use discretion, but of course you want to suck up, and that's what Barbara says. Yeah, suck up. Yeah, give them the answers they want to hear. When presenting yourself to the potential employee, or potential employer, you can never be too much of a suck-up. Barbara notes on page 125 that that she was using marijuana before she left for Minnesota, right? And maybe that was, using marijuana to recover from all her aching bones from working in Maine. I don't know what it was. But now Barbara says I have to figure out how to get rid of all the traces of marijuana out of my body so I can pass the drug test. Right? And Barbara, again, she's a very educated woman. She's not abusing marijuana. It is technically possible, I think, to abuse marijuana, but marijuana is not that bad of a drug. Barbara notes that. I note that. It's not even as bad as alcohol for your body, and most studies in most nations would note that. Some people claim it's a gateway drug, but so is alcohol, for that matter. Nobody wants to reintroduce prohibition. But anyway, the author on page 127 gives a quote and says, "The truth is, I don't much care if my fellow workers are getting high in the parking lot or even lifting the occasional retail item, and I certainly wouldn't snitch if I did. Nor do I believe that management rules by divine right or the undiluted force of superior knowledge as the so-called surveys demand you acknowledge." And again, this is more of her berailing these personality tests. You know, and I almost agree with Barbara. When you barely can afford to live, you know, will you steal? I mean, if you can't afford to feed yourself, it's tempting to take that extra $20 out of the cash register. I would admit it would be. You're trying to survive. And of course, on 128, Barbara notes how the employers, they want employees to feel demeaned by the drug tests, right? The drug tests aren't about getting people, you know, preventing employees from applying to jobs. The drug tests, they cost a lot of money. Barely anyone ever tests positive. They're all about making these employees feel like they're little children, that they're barely humans, that they have no dignity and no respect. That's my opinion, and that's Barbara's opinion, and I agree with Barbara's opinion. I think, you know, that instead of drug testing for potential employees, we should give employees a living wage so that their lives might not suck to the point at which they believe drugs are necessary. Right? People use drugs because they can't tolerate the life they're living. Right? I mean, they feel their life sucks so badly that drugs are the only way out of it. Right? Alcohol is a good example of that. Right? You disassociate from reality because your reality is so terrible that you don't want to face it. Anyway. Page 135, Barbara notes that corporations like Walmart don't want employees who are nonconformist. Right? You know, there's room in every corporation for a nonconformist. No, no, no. The answer is totally disagree, right, on that survey. You want to be a conformist if you want to work for a place like Walmart. And Barbara also notes, and I quote, "One of the effects of drug testing is to limit worker mobility, maybe even one of the functions of drug testing. Each potential new job requires the application, the interview, and the drug test, which is something to ponder with gasoline running at nearly $2 a gallon, not to mention what you may have to pay for a babysitter." Barbara would love today's economy, right? $4 a gallon for gasoline. What would that be like going to some hospital to get a drug test? You know. Anyway, you know, we're a society obsessed with modesty, but you got to strip down for a drug test, right? Think about the hypocrisy of that. Not that I'm a prude, because I'm not a prude. I have no problem with nudity, but we're taught to be, you know, to be ashamed of our bodies, but then we are made to show our bodies to potential employees when we're low-wage workers. I'm just talking about the hypocrisy of that. Page 137, Barbara notes that companies want to sell as many products as possible to make their management and shareholders wealthy. That's not a new idea. It's been throughout the book. On page 139, Barbara notes how she has a really difficult time finding an affordable apartment in Minneapolis because demand far exceeds supply. Page 140, she notes that many poor live in hotel rooms because they cannot find other more permanent housing at an affordable price. At 142, Barbara notes that some plumbing place for which she applied to work claimed it would pay Barbara $10 an hour. Later, it claimed that amount of money was incorrect. But anyway, you know, $10 an hour is still not really much of a living wage. Of course, Barbara is offered a job by Walmart at $7 an hour on page 143, but of course she can't negotiate that wage. They basically just say, come in for training for orientation, and they don't give her an opportunity to negotiate the fact that she's getting paid a pittance. On page 146, she learns about time theft, right? Walmart talks about that in their orientation, and time theft is doing anything other than working during company time, anything at all, right? But then Barbara notes, of course, how theft of our time isn't an issue, right? You know, the company can steal Barbara's time if they want to, but she just can't steal any time of her own. Page 151, Barbara notes that, you know, even though she has a PhD, although Walmart doesn't technically know that, although I'm sure they could find out if they wanted to, she's still treated like a member of the criminal class, right? You know, she's a criminal. She's a peasant. On page 153, she notes how poor women have more to fear than women who have houses with double locks and alarm systems and husbands and dogs, right? She's living in an apartment, right, at this point in time that's not even a safe place to live. And they're charging her a fortune to live there, by the way. On page 156, Barbara notes how Walmart is constantly rearranging items in the store. Barbara's working, of course, in the women's clothing department, but Walmart's constantly rearranging things to prevent employees from memorizing the layout of the department, right? I mean, imagine that. So Barbara can't even use her IQ in remembering where everything's located because they keep changing around her department, right? And so this creates this difficulty for employees who wish to learn where items in their given department are, right? Employees are constantly forced to relearn the location in which various items have been replaced. And Barbara's job, of course, for the most part, is just to put items back on the shelves, right? You know, people go into the dressing rooms to try items on, then they put them in the cart when they come out because they don't want to put them back themselves. So Barbara's job is basically to go and keep, for 8 hours a day, keep taking carts of clothing around the women's department and putting the clothing where it belongs. What a job is that? Talk about self-alienation. Anyway. On page 158, Barbara notes how a sewage accident occurs in her crappy hotel in which she's living at Clearview. And Barbara notes how she's staying there for $265 per week, right? And I might note from that, right, she's paying approximately $13,000 per year to live in a crappy apartment, right? A crappy hotel apartment. $13,000 a year. I mean, horrible. There's no refrigerator and there's no stove. She notes on page 160 that, you know, sometimes 2 or more people are even sharing the same bed. Santorum would like that one, wouldn't he? Right? There are 2 guys, you know, renting an apartment together and they're sharing the same bed. They're clearly fucking one another, right? You know. Santorum is obsessed with that concept, by the way, which is why I'm pointing it out. He's a presidential candidate. Well, anyway, in the next video, I'm going to talk more about selling in Minnesota and more of the problems Barbara faces as an employee. Thank you for watching.